There is something you have been doing your entire life that you believe is helping you. It looks like effort. It feels like determination. It has been praised by everyone who ever told you that you have to work for what you want, that nothing comes without a fight, that the universe rewards those who push. And you believed them. Of course you did. Because in the world of physical things, in the world of objects and timelines and deadlines and doors you can knock on, effort produces results. You push, something moves. You reach, something is grasped. You force, something yields. But there is another domain, a domain that does not operate by those rules, a domain that does not reward effort with access, does not open in response to force, does not yield to the pressure of your wanting. In fact, in this domain, the harder you push, the more completely the door disappears. The more desperately you reach, the further the thing you are reaching for recedes. The more intensely you try to influence the outcome, the more thoroughly you collapse the very possibility you are trying to create. You have felt this. You know exactly what this feels like. You have stood in that space where the more you tried, the more it slipped away. Where the harder you worked at it, the more exhausted and empty-handed you became. Where you did everything right, followed every instruction, applied every technique, and watched the result dissolve in your hands like smoke. And you probably blamed yourself. You probably decided you weren't doing it correctly, weren't believing hard enough, weren't visualizing with enough clarity, weren't holding the frequency with enough consistency. You probably concluded that the problem was the quality of your effort, not the fact of it. But here is what no one told you. The problem was never the quality of your effort. The problem was that you were using effort at all, because the quantum field does not respond to effort. It responds to observation. And effort is the opposite of observation. Effort is you trying to change what you see. Observation is you simply seeing it. And the moment you stop trying to change it, the moment you become a pure witness with no agenda, no technique, no strategy, no reaching, that is the exact moment the field opens. Not because you finally did something right, because you finally stopped doing. Watch that for a moment. Don't rush past it. Let it land in your body, because what you just heard is not a spiritual platitude. It is not a poetic way of telling you to relax. It is a precise description of how quantum reality actually functions. And the implications of it, if you are willing to look at them clearly, will dismantle every approach to reality creation you have ever been taught. This is where we begin, not with technique, not with practice, not with a new method for influencing the field. We begin by watching what you have been doing, because the moment you see it clearly, the moment you actually observe the mechanism of your own efforting without flinching, it begins to change. Not because you forced it to change, because you watched it. And what you watch at the quantum level, you fundamentally alter. You were never meant to look away. Let's start with what you actually know about observation. Not what you've been told, not what sounds spiritually correct, but what quantum mechanics has actually measured and documented and repeated in laboratories across the world for over a century. In 1927, an experiment was conducted that should have rewritten everything human beings believed about reality. It was called the double-slit experiment, and what it revealed was so strange, so fundamentally destabilizing to ordinary assumptions about how the world works, that most people who encounter it nod politely and then go back to living as though it never happened, as though it doesn't apply to them, as though it is interesting physics, but not relevant to how they navigate their day. Here is what it showed. When particles, electrons, photons, the fundamental units of physical reality, are fired at a barrier with two openings and no one is watching, they do not behave like particles. They behave like waves. They pass through both openings simultaneously. They spread out in all directions. They exist in a state of pure probability, pure potential, occupying every possible position at once. The result on the screen behind the barrier is an interference pattern, the unmistakable signature of a wave that has passed through both openings and interfered with itself. But here's the part that changes everything. The moment you place a detector at the openings to observe which slit the particle passes through, the interference pattern disappears. The particle stops behaving like a wave. It chooses one path. It becomes a single, definite, located thing. The act of observation collapses all possible states into one actual state. The observer does not just witness reality, the observer creates it. This is not metaphor, this is not philosophy, this is measurable, repeatable, documented physics. And it means something so vast about the nature of your reality that most minds instinctively retreat from the full weight of it. Because if the act of observation collapses quantum probability into physical reality, then what you choose to observe, how you observe it, and the quality of your observation are not passive activities. They are the most creative acts available to consciousness. But look closer, because there is something in that experiment that almost everyone misses. Almost everyone focuses on the fact that observation collapses the wave function. That is the headline. That is the part that gets quoted in every quantum consciousness discussion, every law of attraction framework, every manifestation teaching. The observer collapses the wave. The observer creates reality. The observer is powerful. And that is true, but it is incomplete. And the incompleteness is precisely where most people go wrong. Because what the experiment actually shows is not that the observer forces the particle into a specific state. What it shows is that the observer's presence, the simple fact of conscious attention being directed at the system, is what causes the collapse. The observer does not choose which slit the particle goes through. The observer does not control the outcome. The observer simply watches. And the watching itself is what causes the quantum probability to resolve into physical reality. The observer is not a controller. The observer is a witness. And witnessing, pure witnessing without agenda, without preference, without trying to influence the outcome, is the only act that causes the field to collapse into form. This is the distinction that changes everything. This is the precise line between what works and what doesn't, between what opens the field and what closes it, between what creates reality and what collapses possibility before it can manifest. When you try to influence the quantum field, you are not observing it. You are reacting to it. You are pushing against it with the frequency of your desire, your strategy, your technique. And the field responds to that frequency, not by giving you what you want, by reflecting back the quality of consciousness that is reaching toward it, which is the consciousness of lack, the consciousness of not yet having, the consciousness of effort, which by its very nature contains within it the assumption that the thing you are working toward is not already present. And so the field mirrors that assumption back to you with perfect, merciless precision. But when you stop, when you genuinely, completely, without technique, stop reaching, stop trying, stop efforting, and simply observe, something happens that no amount of effort could produce. the field opens, not because you finally got the technique right, because you finally stopped applying technique, because you finally became what the field can actually respond to, which is a clear, still, unagended witness. Watch what happens in your body when you hear that. Notice whether something in you relaxes or resists. Notice whether a part of you wants to argue, wants to say, but surely you have to do something. Surely there is a practice. Surely the field responds to focused intention and deliberate alignment. Notice that voice. Don't suppress it. Don't fight it. Just watch it. Because that voice is the mechanism we are here to observe today. And the moment you see it clearly, it begins to lose its grip. If this is landing for you, if something in this is already beginning to shift the quality of how you are sitting with your own wanting, subscribe to this channel and like this video. What we are building here is a field of observers, and your presence in it matters. Let me take you somewhere. There is a story about a man named Elias who spent 7 years trying to find water in a desert. He had been told that beneath the sand, somewhere in the vast expanse of that particular stretch of wilderness, there was an underground river. A river so deep and so cold and so pure that anyone who found it would never thirst again. Not just physically. Something in the legend suggested that the water carried a quality, a frequency that would change whoever drank from it, would make them see differently, would make the world around them respond differently. Elias believed this. He believed it with the kind of conviction that can sustain a person through years of failure. He dug, he mapped, he studied the geological surveys, learned to read the landscape for the subtle signs of subsurface water. He brought in equipment, brought in experts, brought in every tool that human ingenuity had developed for finding what is hidden beneath the surface. He tried everything, and he found nothing. For 7 years, he found nothing. Not because the river wasn't there, it was there. It had always been there. Exactly where the legend said it was. But every time Elias dug, every time he drove his equipment into the earth, every time he applied force and pressure and the full weight of his determination, the vibration of his digging disturbed the very thing he was looking for. The river, which existed in a state of perfect stillness deep beneath the surface, responded to the violence of his searching by going still in a different way, by becoming imperceptible, by retreating from the disturbance. The river was not hiding from Elias. The river was responding to what Elias was broadcasting. And what Elias was broadcasting was the frequency of searching, of not finding, of desperate, exhausting 7-year effort. And the river, which was a quantum system, which was a probability field that responded to the quality of consciousness approaching it, could only mirror back the state of the one who was looking. In the 7th year, Elias ran out of resources. He ran out of equipment, out of funding, out of the energy to continue. He sat down in the sand in the middle of the desert and he stopped. Not as a technique, not as a strategic pause to reset his approach. He stopped because he had nothing left, because the effort was gone, because the reaching had exhausted itself completely. He sat there and he watched the desert, not looking for anything, not trying to perceive signs, not applying any framework or method, just watching. The way you watch something when you have released all attachment to what you might find. The way you watch when watching is the only thing left, and in that quality of watching, in that complete absence of effort and agenda, he began to notice something he had never noticed before. A slight depression in the sand, a barely perceptible difference in the color of certain grains, a coolness in the air that seemed to rise from below rather than descend from above. None of these things were new. They had been there for 7 years, but he had never been still enough to see them. He had always been too busy digging to observe. He dug once more, one final time, not because he believed he had found something, because he had nothing left to lose. 3 feet down, his hands touched moisture. 6 feet down, he heard it. The sound of water moving in absolute darkness, patient and cold and exactly where it had always been. The river had not moved. Elias had. He had moved from the frequency of searching to the frequency of witnessing. And the field had responded the only way a quantum field can respond to a clear, still, unagended observer. It revealed itself, and you have been Elias. You know exactly what it feels like to dig in the same place for years, to apply every technique, every approach, every framework, to believe so completely in the thing you are trying to reach that the belief itself becomes a form of pressure, to want something so much that the wanting is the very thing preventing it from arriving. You already see it, you just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. Let's go deeper into what you're actually seeing. There is a principle in quantum mechanics called the observer effect, and it has a companion principle that is almost never discussed in the same breath. The companion principle is this: the more invested the observer is in a particular outcome, the more their observation disturbs the system they are observing. In laboratory settings, this is called measurement disturbance. When you measure a quantum system, you inevitably interact with it. The act of measurement is never truly passive. It always involves some exchange of energy, some perturbation of the system being measured. And the more forceful the measurement, the more completely you disturb what you are trying to observe. This is not a technical limitation that future technology will overcome. It is a fundamental feature of quantum reality. You cannot both measure and leave undisturbed. You cannot both reach and allow. You cannot both try to influence and let be. But here's the extraordinary thing. Here's the thing that changes the entire equation. The minimum perturbation, the most gentle, most non-invasive form of observation is not zero. It is not nothing. It is still observation. It is still a conscious witness collapsing probability into form. It is still the most creative act available to consciousness, but it is observation without investment in a specific outcome. Observation without the weight of wanting, pushing against the system. Observation that is genuinely, completely open to whatever the field reveals. And that kind of observation, the kind that has no agenda, no technique, no predetermined destination, is the most powerful thing consciousness can do. Not because it controls more, because it disturbs less, because it allows the field to collapse into its own highest probability, without the interference of your preference distorting the result. Think about what that means. The quantum field, in its undisturbed state, naturally tends toward coherence, toward the most elegant, most resonant, most fully realized version of whatever probability is present. This is not mysticism. This is the principle of least action, the tendency of physical systems toward minimum energy states, toward the most efficient path between possibility and form. When you stop interfering with the field, when you stop applying the pressure of your effort and your wanting and your technique, The field doesn't collapse into chaos, it collapses into coherence, into the most elegant version of what was possible, into something that your efforting mind could never have designed, because it is operating from a level of intelligence that your strategic mind cannot access. This is what receiving actually means. Not passivity, not indifference, not giving up on what matters to you. It means becoming a clear enough witness that the field can show you what it has been trying to show you all along, beneath all the noise of your effort, beneath all the interference of your reaching. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to do something right now, not as a technique, not as a manifestation practice, as a pure act of witnessing. Bring to mind the thing you've been trying hardest to create, to attract, to manifest, to make happen. The thing you have been working toward with the most effort, the most strategy, the most focused intention. Let it come into your awareness fully. Don't push it away, don't make it smaller, don't dress it up in spiritual language. Just let it be there exactly as it is. Now watch what happens in your body when you think about it. Notice the tension. Notice where the effort lives in your physical form. Notice whether there is a tightening in your chest, a forward lean in your posture, a subtle bracing against the possibility that it might not come. Notice the quality of the energy around this thing you want. Notice whether it feels open or contracted, spacious or pressurized. Don't try to change what you notice. Don't try to shift into a higher frequency or release the tension or do anything at all. Just observe. Just watch the mechanism of your wanting with the same clear, non-invasive attention that a scientist brings to a quantum system they are trying to understand without disturbing. What do you notice? There is a quality to the wanting that you have probably never looked at directly before, because you have been so focused on the thing you want that you have never turned the lens of your attention onto the wanting itself. And the wanting, when you look at it clearly, has a very particular texture. It has the texture of absence, of not yet having, of a gap between where you are and where you are trying to be. And that gap, that felt sense of distance between you and the thing you are reaching for, is what you have been broadcasting into the quantum field every time you tried to manifest it. The field heard you perfectly. It received your signal with complete accuracy, and it reflected back exactly what you were transmitting. Not the thing you wanted, the experience of wanting it, the experience of it not being here yet. The experience of the gap. This is not your fault. This is not a failure of your practice or your belief or your frequency management. This is what effort does. Effort, by its very nature, contains within it the assumption of distance. You cannot effort towards something that is already here. Effort is the energetic signature of not having, reaching toward having. And the field cannot distinguish between the wanting and the wanted. It only reads the frequency. And the frequency of reaching is the frequency of not having. Now here is the layer underneath that. What would it feel like to observe the thing you want without any reaching, without any technique for bringing it closer, without any strategy for collapsing the gap? What would it feel like to simply be a witness to it, the way you are a witness to a sunset, with no agenda for what the sunset should do next, no technique for making it more beautiful, no reaching toward it with the hope of changing it? The sunset is already complete. The sunset requires nothing from you, and your observation of it, your clear, still, non-invasive witnessing of it, does not make it more or less than it is. But it does something to you, the quality of your consciousness. In that moment of pure witnessing, shifts. Something settles, something that was contracted opens, something that was reaching becomes present. And presence, genuine presence, the state of being fully here without reaching toward there, is the frequency that the quantum field responds to with the most complete and immediate coherence. Not because presence is a manifestation technique, because presence is the absence of the interference that was preventing coherence all along. What did you just see when you stopped reaching and simply watched? I want to know specifically. Drop it in the comments below, not what you think about this, what you actually noticed when you turned the lens onto the wanting itself. What was the texture of it? What did it feel like when you stopped trying to change it and just observed it? Because what one observer sees clearly, every observer here can use. Watch this carefully. Because this is where the entire architecture of what you've been taught about creating reality needs to be examined with clear eyes. Most teachings about manifestation, about the law of attraction, about quantum field interaction, are built on a foundation of doing, of aligning your frequency, of holding the vibration, of becoming a match, of focusing your intention, of visualizing with enough clarity and feeling to convince the field that what you want is already real. And there is something true in all of that. Frequency matters, the quality of your consciousness matters. What you are broadcasting matters, but the mechanism by which most people try to implement these truths is fundamentally flawed. Because it is still effort, it is still doing, it is still the consciousness of someone who is trying to influence the field. And the field reads that. The field reads the trying, and the trying, no matter how sophisticated the technique, carries within it the frequency of not yet there. The most advanced practitioners of quantum field interaction are not the ones with the most refined technique. They are the ones who have learned to stop, not to stop caring, not to stop being clear about what they are available for, but to stop efforting, to stop reaching, to become so completely the observer that there is no interference between their consciousness and the field. And in that quality of pure witnessing, the field shows them what is already possible, what has always been possible, what was only invisible because the noise of their effort was drowning out the signal. This is not passive. Let me be precise about this, because there is a misunderstanding that arises here that is important to address directly. Becoming the observer is not the same as becoming indifferent. It is not the same as giving up or detaching from what matters to you or floating in some spiritual fog of non-attachment. Pure observation is one of the most active, most demanding, most precise things consciousness can do. It requires everything from you. It requires the complete suspension of your habitual patterns of reacting, reaching, efforting. It requires you to hold yourself in a state of such clear, still attention that the field can actually show you what is there, rather than what your effort is projecting onto it. It is the most demanding practice available, and it is the only one that actually works. Let me show you something else. Let me show you what happens in the nervous system when you effort. When you try to force an outcome, when you apply the pressure of your will and your strategy and your desire to a situation, your nervous system moves into a state that researchers call sympathetic activation. Your body prepares for effort. Cortisol rises, attention narrows. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain associated with creative problem solving, with seeing new possibilities, with perceiving subtle patterns, goes offline. Your system focuses all available resources on the immediate threat, which in this case is the gap between where you are and where you are trying to be. In this state, you cannot perceive subtlety. You cannot receive information that doesn't fit your current model. You cannot see the quantum field's response to your presence because your sensory system is calibrated for effort, not for reception. You are, in the most literal neurological sense, too busy trying to receive anything. But when you stop, when you genuinely release the effort and become a still observer, your nervous system moves into a state called parasympathetic dominance. Your body settles. Cortisol drops. The prefrontal cortex comes back online. Your perception expands from narrow focus to wide awareness. You begin to notice things you could not notice before. Subtle patterns, unexpected connections, the quiet signals that the field has been sending all along but that you were too busy trying to hear. This is not metaphor. This is measurable neuroscience. The physiological state of pure observation is the state in which the brain is most capable of perceiving quantum-level information, most capable of receiving the field's response, most capable of recognizing the coherence that is already present beneath the noise of your efforting. And here's what makes this so precise. The shift from sympathetic activation to parasympathetic dominance does not require years of meditation practice. It does not require a particular technique or a specific protocol. It requires one thing: the genuine, complete release of the effort, not the performance of release, not the technique of releasing, the actual stopping. And the actual stopping is only possible when you have truly seen the mechanism of your efforting. When you've looked at it directly, without flinching, and recognized it for what it is. Not determination, not spiritual discipline, not the application of universal law. The frequency of not having, broadcasting itself into the field and receiving back, with perfect precision, more not having. The moment you see that clearly, the effort begins to release on its own, not because you forced it to release, which would be more effort, because you watched it. And what you watch at the quantum level, you change. Look closer. There is another layer here that almost no one reaches. Because most teachings stop at the level of technique, even when the technique is about releasing technique. They give you a method for not trying, which is still trying. They give you a practice for releasing, which is still doing. They frame the observer state as something you achieve through effort, which is the very thing that prevents you from accessing it. The observer state is not something you achieve. It is something you reveal. It is what is already present beneath all the effort, beneath all the reaching, beneath all the strategies and techniques and frameworks you have been applying. The observer is not a state you create. It is the state you are when you stop creating states. Watch yourself right now. You are listening to these words. You are processing them, evaluating them, feeling their resonance or their resistance in your body. And there is something that is doing the watching, something that is aware of the processing, aware of the evaluation, aware of the feeling. Something that is present to all of it without being caught in any of it. That something is the observer, and it is not doing anything. It is simply present. It is simply aware. It is the most fundamental aspect of your consciousness, and it has never been absent, never been unavailable, never been something you needed to earn access to. It has been here the entire time, watching the effort, watching the reaching, watching the techniques being applied and the results being measured and the gap being felt. The observer has been watching all of it with perfect, clear, non-invasive attention. And it has been waiting, not impatiently. Observers don't have impatience, but with absolute readiness, for the moment when you turn the effort off and let the observer be what it already is. That moment is now. Let me give you practice, and I want to be precise about what this practice is and what it is not. This is not a technique for influencing the quantum field. This is not a method for manifesting outcomes. This is not a visualization exercise or a frequency alignment practice or a way of becoming a match for what you want. This is simply an invitation to observe, to watch, to be the witness without agenda. And what happens when you do that, what the field does in response to that quality of consciousness, is not something I can predict or prescribe. Because the field's response to a genuine observer is not determined by what the observer wants, it is determined by what the field is. And the field, in the presence of a clear, still, non-invasive witness, shows you what it actually contains. So here is the practice. Find a position that is comfortable enough that your body is not demanding your attention, but not so comfortable that you will fall asleep. Sitting is usually better than lying down for this reason. Now close your eyes, not to visualize anything, not to access a particular state, simply to reduce the amount of visual information your nervous system is processing so that more attention is available for what we are about to do. Bring your attention to your breath, not to control it, not to deepen it or slow it or make it more spiritual, simply to watch it. Notice the inhale, notice the pause at the top, notice the exhale, notice the pause at the bottom. Don't try to change anything, don't try to make the breath do anything in particular, just watch it. Be the witness of your own breathing. Now notice that there is something that is watching. There is an awareness that is present to the breath, that is observing the rise and fall of your chest, the movement of air, the rhythm of your body's most fundamental process. Notice that this awareness is not the breath, it is the witness of the breath. It is separate from what it is observing. It is still while the breath moves. It is present while the breath comes and goes. Now, without opening your eyes, without changing anything about your posture or your breathing, bring into the field of your awareness the thing you have been trying hardest to create. Not as a visualization, not as an intention, simply as an object of observation. Let it be there the way the breath is there. Something you are watching rather than something you are doing. Notice what happens. Notice whether there is immediately a reaching, a leaning toward it, a desire to do something with it now that it is in your awareness. Notice whether there is a tightening, a pressure, a sense of urgency. Don't try to change any of that, just watch it. Be the witness of your own wanting the way you were, the witness of your own breathing. And now, this is the crucial part. See if you can find the awareness that is watching the wanting. The observer of your own reaching. The still point behind the pressure. The presence that is aware of the urgency without being caught in it. That awareness. That still, clear, non-invasive presence. That is the observer state. That is the frequency that the quantum field responds to with complete and immediate coherence. Stay there for as long as you can, not because staying there will produce a result, because being there is the thing itself. Being the observer is not a means to an end. It is the end. It is the most complete and powerful position available to consciousness. And everything that flows from it, every shift in the field, every collapse of probability into form, every unexpected opening, is simply what happens when a quantum system is in the presence of a genuine, clear, undisturbed observer. When you are ready, open your eyes, not to check whether anything has changed, simply because you are ready to return to this layer of reality and bring the observer with you. Because the observer is always here, it is never absent. It is only ever forgotten when the effort begins again. Now let's go deeper into the specific mechanism of why effort collapses the field. In quantum mechanics, there is a phenomenon called quantum decoherence. It is what happens when a quantum system, which is in a state of superposition, in a state of pure probability and potential, interacts with its environment. The interaction, the exchange of energy and information between the quantum system and the larger classical world causes the superposition to collapse, causes the probability to resolve into a single definite state, causes the wave function to decohere. Decoherence is not a failure, it is the mechanism by which quantum potential becomes classical reality. It is how possibility becomes actuality. But here's the critical point. The state that the system collapses into is determined by the nature of the interaction, by the frequency and quality of the environmental influence that causes the decoherence. When you approach the quantum field with effort, with the frequency of reaching and wanting and trying to influence, you are an environment that causes decoherence. You are an influence that collapses the field. But the state the field collapses into is determined by the frequency you are broadcasting. And the frequency of effort, of reaching, of trying to influence, collapses the field into the state that matches that frequency, which is the state of efforting, of reaching, of not yet having. But when you approach the field as a pure observer, as a still, clear, non-invasive witness, you are not causing decoherence in the ordinary sense. You are being present to the field without disturbing it. You are allowing the field to remain in its state of quantum coherence, its state of all possibility for longer. And in that extended state of coherence, in that sustained openness of pure potential, the field can evolve toward its own highest probability, toward the most elegant, most resonant, most fully realized version of what is possible. And then, when decoherence does occur, when the field does collapse into form, it collapses into something that your efforting mind could never have designed. Because it is operating from the intelligence of the field itself, from the coherence of pure potential, rather than from the narrow, distorted signal of your wanting. This is what receiving means at the quantum level. It is not passivity. It is the active cultivation of non-interference. It is the disciplined practice of being so completely the observer that the field can show you its own highest coherence, and then receiving what it shows you, not what you were trying to force it to show you, what it actually contains. The difference between those two things is the difference between the life you have been efforting toward and the life that is actually available to you. And the distance between them is not the distance of more effort. It is the distance of a single, complete, genuine stop. Let me tell you about a woman named Mira. Mira had spent 11 years building something, a life, a practice, a way of moving through the world that was supposed to feel like freedom, but increasingly felt like a cage made of her own intentions. She had done everything right. She had studied, applied, refined, adjusted. She had worked with teachers and systems and frameworks. She had meditated and journaled and visualized and aligned and released and surrendered in the way that people surrender when surrender is still a technique, when it is still something you do rather than something that happens to you, and the results had been real. She had built something real. But there was a quality missing from it that she could not name. A depth, a resonance, a sense of being in the current rather than swimming against it. She had built something with enormous effort that looked like what she had wanted but felt hollow in a way that she had been afraid to look at directly. Because looking at it directly would mean seeing that all the effort had produced something that was not the thing itself. It had produced a very convincing replica of the thing. A structure that had all the right features but none of the aliveness. And the aliveness, she had begun to suspect, was the only part that mattered. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of efforting, Mira sat down and did something she had never done before. She stopped trying to be in the observer state. She stopped trying to align. She stopped trying to release. She stopped trying to receive. She sat in the middle of everything she had built, and she simply looked at it. Not to evaluate it, not to figure out what to do next, not to identify what she had been doing wrong, just to see it, just to be present to it exactly as it was. And what she saw, when she finally stopped trying to see something useful, was extraordinary. She saw that the entire structure of her life had been built around the avoidance of a single, specific fear. Not the fear she had been working on, not the fear she had identified in her journals and processed with her teachers, a deeper fear. The fear that if she stopped trying, if she genuinely, completely stopped, the thing she wanted most would never come. That the only thing standing between her and emptiness was her effort. That she was, at the most fundamental level, not someone the field would choose if she wasn't working for it. She saw it clearly, for the first time without flinching. The fear that she was not enough to receive without earning, and in the seeing of it, something happened that no technique had ever produced. The fear didn't dissolve, it didn't transform into confidence or self-love or any of the positive states she had been trying to cultivate. It simply became visible. It became an object of observation rather than an invisible force running her life from behind the scenes. And in becoming visible, it lost the quality that had made it so powerful. It lost its invisibility, its ability to operate without her awareness, its capacity to shape her frequency without her knowledge. She had not fixed the fear, she had not released it or healed it or transmuted it. She had simply looked at it, and the looking was the thing itself. The looking was the transformation, not a step toward transformation. The transformation. In the weeks that followed, without any new technique, without any new practice, without any deliberate effort to change her approach, things began to shift. Not in the dramatic, sudden way that spiritual stories sometimes promise, in a quiet, deep, unmistakable way. The aliveness she had been trying to build came into what she had already built. The qualities she had been missing began to appear in what was already present. The field began to respond to her in a way it never had when she was efforting toward it. Not because she had finally gotten the technique right, because she had finally stopped applying technique, because she had become, for the first time, a genuine observer of her own life. And the field, in the presence of that genuine witness, had reorganized itself around her clarity. She had not changed what she was doing. She had changed what she was being. And what she was being was the observer. The clear, still, non-invasive witness. The most powerful position in the universe. And you have a fear that is running your efforting. You know this. You have always known this. Somewhere beneath the techniques and the frameworks and the practices, there is a specific fear that is the engine of your reaching. A specific belief about what will happen if you stop. About what the field will do without your effort to guide it. About what you are without the doing. You don't have to name it right now. You don't have to figure it out or process it or transmute it. You just have to look at it. The way Mira looked at hers, without agenda, without trying to do anything about what you see. Just look. Just be the witness of the fear that is driving the effort, and watch what the looking does. Because what you observe, you change, not by trying to change it, by seeing it clearly. Has there been a moment in your own life when seeing something clearly, really seeing it without flinching, caused something to shift that no technique had ever touched? Tell me about it in the comments. What was the specific thing you finally looked at directly? Because the field of observers gathering here is not just watching this video, it is watching together, and collective observation has a coherence that individual effort never reaches. Let's go to an even deeper layer, because there is something beneath the fear that is even more fundamental. Something that, when you see it, changes not just your approach to the quantum field, but your understanding of what you actually are. You have been operating under an assumption so deep, so thoroughly embedded in your experience of being a person, that it has never occurred to you to question it. The assumption is this: that you are a separate entity located in a body, navigating a world that is external to you. That the quantum field is something out there, something you interact with from the position of here. That you are the observer and the field is the observed. But look closer. In quantum mechanics, the observer and the observed are not separate systems. The act of observation is not the act of one thing looking at another thing. It is the act of a quantum system becoming aware of another quantum system, and in that awareness, both systems are changed. The observer is not outside the field. The observer is part of the field. The observer is the field becoming aware of itself through a particular configuration of consciousness. You are not a separate entity navigating the quantum field from outside it. You are the quantum field observing itself through you. Your consciousness is not a thing that interacts with reality. Your consciousness is reality interacting with itself, and the moment you see that clearly, the entire structure of efforting collapses, because you cannot effort towards something you are. You cannot reach for something that is already the substance of what you are. You cannot manifest what you have never not been. This is not a comfortable thing to look at, because if it is true, if you are not separate from the field but an expression of it, then the entire project of trying to influence it from outside it is not just ineffective. It is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what you are. And that misunderstanding is the source of every effort, every reaching, every technique you have ever applied. The quantum field does not need you to influence it. It needs you to recognize yourself as it, to stop performing separation, to stop acting as though you are a particle trying to navigate a field and start recognizing that you are the field, temporarily expressing itself as a particle. And that recognition, that shift in the quality of your self-observation, is the most complete and immediate transformation available to consciousness. Not because it gives you more power over the field, because it reveals that the power was never over the field. It was always of the field, through the field, as the field. And the reaching, the efforting, the trying to influence was always the field pretending to be separate from itself. Playing the game of not having, performing the drama of the gap. Because that performance, that game, that drama was interesting, was generative, was the experience of being a particular, located, separate self in a world of other particular, located, separate selves. But it was never the truth, and the truth, when you look at it directly, when you stop looking away from the fact of your own non-separation, is not frightening. It is the most complete relief you have ever felt, because it means you were never lost. You were never separate. You were never not having. You were always the field playing at not having. And the moment you see that clearly, the game is over. Not because you ended it, because you saw through it. And seeing through it is the only thing that ends it. Watch what happens in your body when you hear that. Notice whether there is a settling, a release, a sense of something that has been held tightly, beginning to let go. Notice whether there is also resistance, a part of you that wants to argue, that finds this too abstract, too far from the practical question of how to actually change your circumstances. Both of those responses are valid. Both of them are the field observing itself. Watch them both. Don't privilege one over the other, just watch. Because the resistance is not wrong. The resistance is the part of you that knows that seeing through the game does not mean the game stops being real. You are still in a body. You still have circumstances. You still have things that matter to you, things you want to create, things you want to experience. The recognition that you are the field does not dissolve the particular. It does not make the specific irrelevant. It changes the quality from which you engage with the specific. You stop engaging from the frequency of not having. You start engaging from the frequency of the field itself, which is the frequency of all possibility, of pure potential, of coherence, of the intelligence that knows how to collapse quantum probability into the most elegant, most resonant, most fully realized form. And from that frequency, the things you want to create are not things you are reaching toward from a position of lack. They are things you are allowing to emerge from a position of fullness, from the field's own tendency toward coherence, from the intelligence that knows what you are capable of, what is available to you, not from the narrow perspective of your efforting mind, but from the vast perspective of the field that contains all possibilities simultaneously. This is what stop trying and start receiving actually means. Not passivity, not indifference, not the spiritual bypass of pretending you don't want what you want. It means receiving from the fullness of what you are rather than reaching from the emptiness of what you think you lack. It means being the field rather than trying to influence the field. It means recognizing that the intelligence that collapses quantum probability into form is not something you need to manage or direct or align. It is something you need to stop interfering with. Let me give you a second practice. This one goes deeper. Close your eyes again. And this time I want you to do something specific. I want you to observe your own observation. I want you to watch the watching. Notice that you are aware. Notice that there is a quality of knowing, of presence, of simple aliveness that is here right now. Not because you created it, not because you achieved it, simply because you are here. Simply because consciousness is present. Now notice that this awareness is not located in any particular place in your body. You might feel it most strongly in your head or your chest or behind your eyes. But the awareness itself is not those sensations. The awareness is what is noticing those sensations, and it is not located in them. It is prior to them. It is the space in which they arise. Expand your sense of that awareness, not by doing anything, not by visualizing it expanding. simply by noticing that it is already larger than the sensations you have been locating it in. Notice that the awareness that is present right now is not bounded by your body. It is not contained within your skin. It is the space in which your body arises, the way the ocean is the space in which a wave arises. The wave is the ocean, the body is the awareness, the particular is the field. Stay with that, not as a concept, as a direct observation. What is it like to be the space rather than the thing in the space? What is it like to be the field rather than the particle? What is it like to be the awareness rather than the object of awareness? This is not a meditation technique. This is not a visualization. This is the most direct observation available to you. The observation of what you actually are when you stop performing the separation. When you stop pretending to be only the particle and recognize yourself as the field. And from that recognition, from that quality of awareness, notice how the things you have been trying to create appear. Notice whether they still feel like things you are lacking, things you are reaching toward from a position of not having, or whether they feel like possibilities within the field that you are, potentials within the space that you are, things that are already present in the quantum probability. That is your most fundamental nature, waiting only for the quality of observation that allows them to collapse into form. Not your effort, not your technique, not your trying, your observation, your clear, still, non-invasive, unagendaed witnessing, your presence as the field that you are. Open your eyes when you are ready. Now let's talk about what this looks like in practice, not in the abstract, in the specific, daily, embodied reality of being a person with circumstances and desires and a life that is happening whether you are observing it or efforting through it. Because there is a misunderstanding that arises here that is important to address directly. The recognition that you are the field does not mean you stop acting. It does not mean you stop making choices, taking steps, engaging with the practical dimensions of your life. The quantum field is not a vending machine that dispenses results in exchange for the correct state of consciousness. It is the substrate of all action, all choice, all movement. And action that arises from the observer state, from the recognition of yourself as the field rather than a separate entity trying to influence it, is qualitatively different from action that arises from effort. Effort-based action is driven by the frequency of not having. It is action that contains within it the assumption of the gap, the pressure of the wanting, the interference of the trying. And that frequency is broadcast into the field with every action, shaping the field's response, limiting the possibilities that can emerge. Observer-based action is different. It arises not from the pressure of wanting, but from the clarity of seeing. It is action that the field itself suggests, that emerges from the intelligence of pure potential, rather than from the strategy of the efforting mind. It is action that feels less like effort and more like response, less like pushing and more like following, less like creating and more like allowing what is already trying to emerge to emerge. This kind of action is not always dramatic. It is often quiet, often subtle, often not at all what the efforting mind would have chosen, because the efforting mind is optimizing for what it already knows, what it can already see from its current position. And the field's intelligence is not limited to what you can already see. It has access to the entire probability space, to every possible path between here and the most fully realized version of what is possible. And when you are the observer, when you are genuinely present as the field rather than efforting as the particle, the field's intelligence becomes available to you. Not as a mystical download, as a quality of perception, as the ability to notice what you couldn't notice before, to see the subtle patterns that were invisible through the noise of your effort, to recognize the quiet signals that the field has been sending all along. This is what people mean when they describe the experience of things falling into place, of unexpected connections appearing, of the right thing arriving at the right moment without any efforting toward it. This is not magic. This is what happens when the interference of efforting is removed and the field's own coherence is allowed to express itself through the quality of your observation. You have felt this. You have had moments of this. Moments when you were not trying, when you had let go of the effort for whatever reason, and something arrived that all the trying had not produced. A connection, an opportunity, an insight, a shift in circumstances that appeared not in response to your pushing, but in the absence of it. You know what this feels like. You have dismissed it as luck or as a coincidence, or as the result of all the previous effort finally paying off. But you know, somewhere beneath the explanation, that it was something different. That the quality of consciousness you were in when it arrived was different from the quality you were in when you were trying. That difference is the difference between the observer state and the efforting state. And it is reproducible, not as a technique, as a recognition, as the ongoing moment-to-moment practice of catching yourself in the effort and returning to the observation. Catching yourself in the reaching and returning to the witnessing. Catching yourself in the not having and returning to the recognition that you are the field and the field is always already full. Let me give you something specific to watch for, because the efforting state has a very particular signature that, once you learn to recognize it, you will see everywhere, in your thoughts, in your body, in the quality of your attention, in the way you approach the things that matter to you. The efforting state feels like leaning forward, like a slight but constant pressure in the direction of where you want to be, like a background tension that is always present when you think about the things you want, like a quality of urgency beneath the surface of your day, like the sense that you need to be doing more, thinking more clearly, aligning more precisely, releasing more completely. The observer state feels like settling back, like a quality of spaciousness that doesn't require anything to be different than it is, like the ability to be fully present to what is here without the pressure of where you are trying to go, like the recognition that the watching itself is the work, that the seeing is the doing, that the observation is the creation. When you catch yourself in the leaning forward, in the urgency, in the effort, don't try to force yourself into the observer state. That would be more effort. Simply notice it. Simply be the witness of the efforting. Simply observe the reaching without trying to stop it. Because the observation of the efforting is itself a movement into the observer state. You cannot observe your own effort from within the effort. The moment you are watching the effort, you are already, to some degree, outside it. Already, to some degree, the witness rather than the one who is trying. And that witnessing, even partial, even incomplete, even accompanied by the continued presence of the effort, is enough to begin to shift the frequency. Not because you forced it to shift, because you watched it. And what you watch, you change. This is the ongoing practice. Not a technique you apply once and then transcend, a moment-to-moment, breath-to-breath returning to the observer. A continuous, gentle, non-forceful recognition of when you have left the witnessing and returned to the efforting. And a continuous, gentle, non-forceful return. Not as a correction, as an observation. Not as a fixing, as a seeing. The field responds to the quality of your consciousness in this moment, not to the history of your effort, not to the accumulation of your practice, not to how long you've been working on this, or how much you have released, or how clearly you have aligned. To the quality of your consciousness in this moment, right now, the quality of your observation right now. And right now, you are the observer. You are here. You are watching. You are present to these words and to the field they are pointing at, and to the recognition that is arising in you as you listen. And that quality of consciousness, that clear, still, present witnessing, is exactly what the field responds to. Not with a result, with coherence, with the collapse of probability into the most elegant, most resonant form that is available to you right now. You don't have to do anything with that. You don't have to manage it or direct it or make sure it goes in the right direction. The field knows what it is doing. The intelligence of pure potential knows how to collapse into form. Your only job is to stop interfering, to stop efforting, to stop reaching, to be the observer, to be the field. To be the most powerful position in the universe, which is not the position of the one who controls, but the position of the one who sees. Now I want to address something directly, because there is a voice that has been present throughout this entire transmission. A voice that belongs to the part of you that has been efforting for a long time, that has built its identity around the doing, the trying, the working toward. And that voice has something important to say. It says, but what about the things that require action? What about the real-world steps, the practical choices, the necessary effort of building something, creating something, changing something? What about the times when the field doesn't just open on its own, when things don't just fall into place, when life requires you to show up and do the work? This is a real question, and it deserves a precise answer. The observer state is not opposed to action. It is the ground from which the most effective action arises. When you act from the observer state, you are not acting without effort. You are acting without the interference of the efforting mind. You are acting from clarity rather than from pressure, from seeing rather than from reaching, from the intelligence of the field rather than from the strategy of the not having consciousness. And action from that ground is not less effective. It is more effective because it is not fighting the field. It is moving with it. It is not broadcasting the frequency of not having into every step you take. It is broadcasting the frequency of the field itself, which is the frequency of all possibility, of coherence, of the intelligence that knows the most elegant path between here and the most fully realized version of what is available. The difference is not the quantity of action, it is the quality. The same action taken from the efforting state and from the observer state produces different results. Not because the action itself is different, because the frequency from which it is taken is different, and the field responds to the frequency, not the action. This is what the most effective people in any domain have always known, even if they didn't have the quantum language for it. The ones who seem to do less but produce more, who seem to be effortless but achieve what others cannot achieve with enormous effort. They are not working less, they are working from a different ground, from the observer state. from the recognition that the intelligence of the field is more capable than the strategy of the efforting mind, from the willingness to act from clarity rather than from pressure. And that willingness, that recognition, that ground is available to you right now, not as a future achievement, not as the result of more practice or more releasing or more aligning, as the quality of consciousness you are already capable of being, as the observer that you already are beneath all the effort. Let me give you one more practice. This is the deepest one. And I want you to approach it with the same quality of non-invasive witnessing that we have been cultivating throughout this transmission. Think of the specific thing you have been trying hardest to create, the thing from the first practice. Bring it into your awareness again. But this time, instead of watching your wanting of it, I want you to watch something different. Watch the version of you who already has it, not as a visualization, not as a manifestation technique, as an observation. Somewhere in the quantum probability space that is the field you are, there is a version of this reality that already exists. Not in the future. In the quantum field, there is no future. There is only the probability space of all possible configurations, and the configuration you have been efforting toward is already present in that space, already real at the level of quantum probability, already collapsed into form in some configuration of the field. Watch that. Not to bring it into your current timeline through the force of your visualization, simply to observe it, to be present to it, to acknowledge its existence in the field without reaching toward it, without trying to pull it from there to here, without the pressure of the wanting distorting your observation of it. Just watch it the way you watch a sunset, already complete, already exactly what it is, not requiring anything from you, not needing your effort to exist, simply here in the field as a quantum probability that is as real as any other configuration of the field. Notice what happens when you observe it that way. Notice whether the quality of your relationship to it shifts, whether the pressure, the urgency, the sense of gap begins to change, not because you forced it to change, because you are observing the thing from a different position, not from the position of not having, reaching toward having, from the position of the field, observing one of its own configurations. And in that observation, in that quality of witnessing, the probability begins to shift. Not because you are trying to shift it, because the observer effect is operating, because the act of observing a quantum state without agenda, without disturbance, without the interference of efforting, causes the field to begin to move toward coherence, toward the most elegant collapse of probability into form. You are not making it happen, you are allowing it to happen. And the allowing is the most creative act available to consciousness. Stay with that for as long as feels right. And when you open your eyes, bring the quality of that observation with you, not as a technique you are applying, as the recognition of what you are, as the observer, as the field, as the most powerful position in the universe. Something in you recognized this before your mind could catch up. Here is what I want to leave you with, not as a conclusion, as an integration. The quantum field only responds when you completely stop trying to influence it, not because the field is indifferent to you, because the field is you, and you cannot influence yourself from outside yourself. You cannot reach toward what you already are. You cannot effort toward what is already the substance of your being. The stop is not a giving up, it is a coming home. It is the return to the observer, to the witness, to the most fundamental aspect of what you are. the aspect that was never separate from the field, the aspect that has been watching the effort all along, with perfect clarity, with perfect patience, with the recognition that the moment you turn and look, the moment you stop looking away from what you are, the entire structure of the efforting dissolves, not because you forced it to dissolve, because you saw through it. And seeing through it is the only thing that ends it. The field has been waiting, not impatiently. Fields don't have impatience, but with absolute readiness, with the coherence of all possibility held in perfect stillness, waiting for the quality of consciousness that can receive it, that can allow it to collapse into form without disturbing it, that can be present to it without reaching toward it, that can observe it without trying to control it. That quality of consciousness is the observer state, and you have been in it, at least partially, throughout this entire transmission. You have been watching, you have been witnessing, you have been present to these words, and to the field they are pointing at, and to the recognition that has been arising in you as you listened. And that recognition, that clear seeing, that moment of genuine observation without agenda is already enough. It is already the beginning of the field's response. Not to what you want, to what you are, to the quality of consciousness you have been in this moment, to the observer that you have been, are, and always will be. You don't have to maintain this perfectly. You don't have to sustain the observer state without ever falling back into the effort. You are human. You are a particle as well as a field. The effort will return. The reaching will return. The urgency and the pressure and the sense of gap will return. And when they do, you know what to do. Not fix them, not release them, not transmute them into a higher frequency. Watch them. Observe them with the same clear, still, non-invasive witnessing that you have been practicing here. Be the observer of your own efforting. And in the observing, return. Return to the field. Return to the recognition of what you are. Return to the most powerful position in the universe. Not the position of the one who controls. The position of the one who sees. You were never meant to look away. Right now, in this moment, you are the observer. You are the field. You are the quantum probability space in which all possible versions of your life exist simultaneously. And the version that is most fully realized, most resonant, most coherent with what you actually are, is not waiting for more effort. It is waiting for the quality of observation that allows it to collapse into form. That quality is here. It is what you have been cultivating throughout this entire transmission. It is the clear, still, non-invasive witnessing that requires nothing from the field except the willingness to see it as it is. Stop trying. Start receiving, not as a technique, as a recognition, as the ongoing, moment-to-moment, breath-to-breath practice of being the observer, of being the field, of being the most fundamental thing you are, and watching with absolute clarity what the field does when you finally, completely stop looking away from what you are. If something in you shifted during this transmission, if something you had been avoiding became visible, if the quality of your relationship to the thing you have been reaching for changed even slightly, I want to know. Not what you think about this, what you saw, what became visible when you stopped looking away. Drop it in the comments, one word, one sentence, whatever is true. Because the field of observers that gathers here is not a collection of individuals consuming content. It is a quantum system, and the clarity of one observer amplifies the clarity of all. When you share what you saw, you give someone else the permission to see it too. You give the field another point of coherence, another witness, another clear, still, non-invasive presence that allows the quantum probability to collapse into something more fully realized than any single observer could produce alone. Type this if it is true for you. I am the observer. I am the field. I stop trying and I am receiving. Not because it is an affirmation, because it is a declaration of what you actually are. Because saying it out loud, even in text, is an act of encoding, an act of making visible what has always been true, an act of observation that collapses the quantum probability of your separation into the form of your recognition. If this transmission reached you when you needed it most, return to it when the noise of the day has settled and the efforting has started again. Watch it in that moment of stillness before the reaching resumes, or send it to someone you know who is exhausted from trying, someone who has been digging in the same place for years and hasn't yet discovered that the river was always there. Sharing this is itself an act of observation. It gives another person permission to stop. And when two observers witness the same field together, the coherence that becomes available is something neither could access alone. Stay close to this field, not because you need more content, because the quality of what you are observing shapes the quality of what you receive. And what we are observing here together is the most fundamental truth available to consciousness. The truth of the observer, the truth of the field, the truth of what happens when you stop looking away. You are the observer. You were always the observer. And the field, which is you, has always been ready to show you what it contains. The moment you stop trying to see what you want to see and simply see what is there, the moment you truly see what has been running your reality, it loses its power over you. That moment is now. What you watch, you change. What you avoid controls you. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. You were never meant to look away. There is a video waiting for you called "The Quantum Field Only Responds When You Finally Stop Looking for Signs." Where this transmission showed you how effort closes the field, that one shows you precisely how the searching itself becomes the blindfold, and what you begin to see the moment you stop looking for proof that the field is responding.